All right, so notice that we've been using quite a few interfaces. We've been focusing mostly on mapping a data model to a database, right? And using some of the idiosyncrasies of JPA, mapping classes to entities and fields and whatnot. So we have this object, this data model that is now bound to a persistent storage. Yes, right? It could be bound to lots of things. It could also be bound to an XML document. Now we're going to bind it to another thing, right? We're going to bind it to an HTTP request, right? Of me retrieving or asking from somewhere on the internet, right? Being able to ask for data, right? When I ask for data that is somehow available as a resource on the web, right? And like to bind it to a particular URL. If I hit this particular URL, I'll get the data from some data model. And to do that, we're going to use a controller, right? The controller pattern, right? Which is part of the MVC world, right? We've been mostly working on the M up to this point, right? Creating the model, the interfaces, binding it to a persistent storage. So we've been focusing mostly on the M part of the MVC part. Let's look at now the controller. So the controller up to this point, that what we've seen so far in class is binding users, moving their mouse, typing their keyboard, interacting with some graphical user interface, right? But that's not the only type of controller, right? A controller is basically anything that can interpret all sorts of events, right? Whether those events are keyboard keystrokes or mouse movements or interaction with the UI, but basically any type of event. And those events are then translated into some model manipulation. Yes? Right? We're going to look at another type of controller. This controller is going to interpret events that are being generated as a server is being hit or bombarded by thousands of HTTP requests. All these events as people click and drag and type URLs and click on as they post something new on Facebook or Twitter or whatever. All this generates an event stream of HTTP requests going out to the server. Yes? Right. So somebody needs to make sense out of all those events, right? And then manipulate the data model of actually, inserting a post, your Twitter post into some database, right? Or retrieving all those posts back into the Twitter feed, right? So let's do that. Let's create a controller that is going to use our database DAO. And expose it and allow you to retrieve data and respond to this stream of incoming HTTP events. So let's do that. So under controllers, we'll create a new controller package. And here's a Java class, and we'll call it course controller. And we're going to create a couple instance versions. So this is my first controller version, and it will, one of them will interact with the database. We'll create another one to interact with XML. Then we'll use the adapters, right? So they can work with different ones. We want to make this available on the web so somebody can hit and execute functions in here, right? For instance, this controller is going to implement things such as public list course, right? That's going to find all courses, and the implementation is going to be using the course DAO, DB DAO, right? So the course, the DAO. Right? And presumably this is going to return DAO.final courses. Right? So it's going to hit the database, it's going to retrieve the list of courses, and it's going to return it. It's going to return that. Right? But I want this to be exposed on the web. I want to be able to hit it through a URL. So for instance, the way we can do that is to first make this class available on the web, on the internet, so that anybody with access to the internet can be able to hit it And then we can do that. We're going to annotate this. We're going to decorate it as a REST controller. Right? It's going to be available on the web. And so this is going to be receiving a stream of HTTP events. I do not want to instantiate this myself. I want the framework to create a singleton instance of this. I wanted to use the factory to instantiate this and provide me an instance injected in here in version of control design pattern. So I'm going to use auto-wired. Right, so you instantiate it, make the instance available here. And I want to map this function to execute when the following event occurs. When the following HTTP event occurs. If you get an incoming HTTP GET, right? HTTP, you have GET, POST, PUT, DELETE. There's a whole bunch of HTTP types of events. Right? If you have a GET event, and the URL follows the following pattern, it starts with, I don't know, whatever, API/courses. If the URL has that pattern, then I want you to execute this function and return to me whatever the database says. Yes? All right, so let's try this out. Oops. Let's compile this, see if this if this explodes. Yes?
What's that actually returning then? Because how does it get returned?
The default is to convert it used to be XML. It used to be that it would try to map whatever data types you had in SQL. It converted them into XML. That was kind of, perhaps at the beginning of the century when XML was still very popular. Today, JSON has kind of replaced that. And so JSON is kind of the more common data representation. So now the default is JSON. But you can convert it. You can say, what do you want? You want XML? You want JSON? Default is JSON. It will convert. It will try to convert Java data types into JSON data types. So lists into arrays, instances into JSON objects, and each one of the fields in Java into fields in JSON. All right. So it looks like it didn't blow up. So let's run this. So now it's starting the server. It looks at that controller. It makes it available on the web. And now it's going to listen for these events, these incoming HTTP requests. So let's, in a new tab, we'll say this says that it's running on localhost 8080. So let's do that. So localhost 8080. And the URL was API/courses. There we go. So let's do that. Right. And indeed we have the data that was in the database, right? The two courses, course 1 with CS 5610 and 3500. We can add a couple more maybe. CS 5500. Let's insert that. And if we refresh, notice that the data is available on the web. Make sense? Right. All right, so we did the JSON part. All right, let's do the XML part, right? And then we'll create an adapter so that I can convert JSON to XML, XML to JSON, and one from the database, one from so they can completely be interchangeable. All right, so let's see, where were we? Right, so we did with the course controller. Okay, I think we have find by ID as well. We can try that out too. Right, so if we have this third one here, we can ask that 1/3. Right, it didn't work. What? Did I not write it? Oh, I didn't write it. Okay, sorry. Computers take everything so literally. Doesn't it understand that that's what I mean? So I have the course ID here, right, as a placeholder, right? And I'll call it, find course by ID, which takes an integer CID, and it uses the find course by ID here, and it passes the CID. We need to read, we need to return, okay, it returns a single course. There we go. We need to parse this from the path and map it to my parameter here. So we could do that with, parse the path for the following variable called course ID, parse it out, and then provide it to me in this parameter of the function, right? And then use it in the function over here. So let's try that out. Oh, notice that you could see the SQL going back and forth as the JPA library talks to the database, mostly for debugging purposes. So okay, that compiled, and we can run that again. Uh-oh. Did it run it? 3, there we go. Right, so if I ask for 3 or ask for 2, right, I can get each individual record. Okay? All right. All right, so let's switch over to the XML world. All right, let's see. We did that. And here are the 2 queries demonstrated there. So let's hop over to the XML world.